film begins and an elderly woman is shown telling a story to her granddaughter. It tells many years ago that a woman lives in a city. He works as a food salesman and sells things door to door. One day, as the saleswoman was returning, she saw a large bungalow in the mirror of her car. Seeing this, the seller thinks about going there and is surprised when he arrives. He is actually surprised to see the view outside the bungalow because the garden was beautiful. Because the trees have been beautifully cut. Later, the vendor enters the bungalow. He couldn't find anyone inside and the whole place was deserted. There were only huge machines, which means that the experiments were conducted here many years ago. The cars were old. She was looking around and then she hears someone upstairs. He goes upstairs as he chases the voice and sees someone sitting in a shadow. The lady calls him and asks him to come forward. That human moves in front of her as she walks, but the lady gets scared when she sees her hands. As he had many weapons in his hands and the lady thinks about leaving but then calls her. She says, "Please don't go and stop here." The lady turns around and understands those were not weapons but her hands. They look like weapons. He held the scissors in his hands because he was a robot, not a human being. The lady asks for his name and he says, "My name is Edward." He tells her that I am not a human being but a robot like humans. But I'm not complete, and the lady took pity on him on hearing this. She feels bad for him and she didn't even look happy. She got scared and the lady noticed a lot of fears because of the scissors in her hands. The lady feels bad for Edward and she doesn't want to leave him alone, so she shows sympathy and takes him with her. Edward was looking at things around him as he sat in the car with her. And he was excited and happy. He came out of that bungalow to enter this world for the first time. The lady takes him home and gives him some clothes to wear. Edward could not wear the clothes due to the scissor hands and face problem. The lady helps him and then introduces him to her family at lunchtime. The lady treated him like a human being, even if he is a robot. She feeds him human food and it is obvious that she was having trouble eating that food. The next day, the lady's husband was cutting down the trees. Edward arrives and shapes the dinosaur-shaped tree with his scissor hands. The lady's husband is surprised to see this. Later, Eduardo makes the family structure with his art. Cut the family shape into trees. The family is delighted to see this, and there was a new guest in that lady's house. When the people around him find out, they come to meet him. They tell the seller that we have found out there is a new guest in their home. And he's talented, so we want to meet him for dinner. The lady is in charge of preparing the food for the night and Edward also helps her. Easily cut the vegetables with the help of scissors. So the lady was trying to open the seal on the box with a machine. Seeing it, Edward sees a flashback. Showing the bungalow where Edward lived. Where the lady went and saw huge cars there. An old scientist is shown who was testing some machines at the time. Those were the machines that made the food automatically. So he goes to a robot and puts a heart-shaped cookie in his heart. Here we discover that the incomplete robot is none other than Edward. The scientist advanced it over time with a lot of work and then Edward was ready after so much hard work. The scientist also puts human feelings in Edward because he wants to make Edward a complete human being. That is why it is called a robot like human being. Something remained, that Edward's hands were still like scissors. This is because his first job was to cut trees, salads and vegetables. The scientist was about to attach human hands to Edward soon. Then the scene changes to the present, where everyone has come to meet a special guest, Edward. Everyone is shocked to see Edward's hands. Even then they want to meet him because they were interested in him, so they behaved well. Edward was sleeping in his room at night and then comes the lady's daughter named Kim. She returned after so many days because she went with her friends to have fun. Now she doesn't know Edward and Edward doesn't know anything about her either. He was watching her while he was lying on the bed in fear. Then Kim sees him as he takes off his makeup. She gets scared when she sees him and leaves the room scared, but her parents have calmed her down. His mother assures him that she must not be afraid because he is Eduardo and will live. Then her mother makes her meet Edward. The next day, Edward is shown giving beautiful shapes to the surrounding trees by cutting them. Edward did it because everyone liked it. They behaved very well, and while he was cutting down his neighbor's tree, a dog approached him. He has long hair and Edward gives him a nice hairstyle as he cuts it. The dog owner is happy to see his dog. The other neighbors are then shown taking their dogs to Edward to mow them. They want a good haircut for their dogs. Edward was an expert at this and does it quickly and neatly. He gives a lady's dog a lion's look and the lady is delighted to see her dog. She was so happy she asked Edward, "Would you cut my hair?" Edward does the same and starts cutting his hair. And he cuts his hair very well. After that, all the women have Edward cut his hair. The vendor also does his own haircut, which he brought here Edward. Edward was talented, so he became famous for his task. He too was called on a television program. Everyone asks Edward to open a salon because he does everything worth appreciating. It is obvious that you will need money to open a salon. So the salesman takes Edward to a bank to ask for a loan for a salon. The bank denies you a loan because you don't have a source of income. You don't even have a bank account or you don't have any identification. This doesn't matter to Edward as money has no value in his life. He only likes one thing and he cares about it, that she is none other than the seller's daughter, Kim. Yes, he likes Kim. Kim likes him too, but his friend was jealous. So make a plan. He tells Kim, we're going to see our parents tonight. And we will steal my father's van. Then we will go to a separate place where we can spend a lot of time together. My dad will take the insurance money and for this we will need the help of Eduardo as only he can open the lock with his scissor hands. Edward is preparing to go with them when Kim asks him to go. Then they go into the house opening the lock but the alarm starts to sound. The shutters in the room Edward was in began to close automatically. Kim and her companions run away from there, but Kim does not want to leave and wants to let Edward out. Her friend won't let her do that. And he takes her with him by force and says we have to leave early. The police are on their way here and she did it because she was jealous of Edward. And the reason is that Kim likes Edward. Meanwhile, the police arrive there and detain Edward. But he doesn't tell them that Kim and her friends were with him. Then Edward appeared before the judge but he leaves him because Eduardo has been alone for many years and doesn't know the difference between good and evil. After that, Edward comes home and Kim thanks him for saving their life without saying her name. Kim says it's my mistake, I should have told you the truth. That in reality, we are going for a robbery. The house we went to that belongs to my friend and Edward says yes, I know. Kim is asking seriously? Did you know? And he says why don't you say anything even knowing this? Edward says why you asked me to do it. Likewise, it increases the respect and love for Edward in Kim's heart. Then it was Christmas Day and Edward makes a huge and enchanting ice statue for Kim. Edward was sharpening the ice and started flying through the air which looked beautiful. Kim also likes to fly on ice, so he starts enjoying it by standing under it. Edward does not know that Kim has arrived here because he was busy doing his job completely. Meanwhile, Kim's friend arrives and says hi out loud. Hearing this voice, Edward loses his attention and accidentally cuts off Kim's hand. Kim's mother arrives and tells her mother that Edward did it by mistake. She takes him in the band. Kim's friend is shown outside. She misbehaves with Edward and pushes him by saying bad things to him. He says you're crazy and you're leaving here. Edward left sad and angry. He also cuts the clothes he wore with his hands. Now he was in the condition he was before and starts cutting down the trees he gave the beautiful shapes. The neighbors who were Edward's demon were afraid of him after the robbery. And a lady calls the police seeing this. Kim is worried about her friend's jealousy. Shout out to her friend that she's furious and she breaks off her relationship with him. Edward was sitting on the corner of the street worried. Suddenly, a dog arrives who has long hair, so Edward calms down after seeing him. So he goes home leaving everything where Kim was alone. They were out of the house looking for Edward and Kim is happy to see Edward in the house. She asks him to keep it but Edward says no, I can't do that. Because my hands are scissors and I can't hurt you. Hearing this, Kim approaches him and hugs him. Now Edward remembers the time when the scientist brought human hands to make him fully human. He had a heart attack before the scientist could repair his hands. That's why he died there, that's why Edward still has scissor hands. Kim's friend is furious. He was drunk and with him friends of him. He arrives at Kim's house in the car with his friends. Here, Edward discovers how dangerously Kim's friend drives. Then he thinks Kim's younger brother is out of the house, so he goes out. Before Kim's brother has a car accident that Edward saves him, they step aside to save him. And Edward's scissors hit the face of Kim's brother. His face is hurt because of it. Kim's brother was screaming. Hearing his voice, Kim's parents and surrounding people arrive. Edward was trying to relax Kim's brother. But everyone thought that Edward was attacking the boy. Kim's father was also accidentally hit by Edward's scissors. Then Kim's friend attacks Edward. Now, to save himself, Edward hurts Kim's friend. Meanwhile, the police arrive so Edward runs away from there. In fact, he wants to go back to the bungalow where he lives and has come to this world. This was no ordinary bungalow, but a world of robotic machines. Kim knows that Edward went there, so she goes to him. And she finds Edward sitting depressed. Kim also sits with him. Kim's friend also approaches and has a gun with which he shoots Edward. It also hits Edward and Kim attacks his friend to save Edward. He slaps Kim and pushes her in it. Edward gets mad so he stabs him with his scissors. He drops it out of the window. For this reason, he dies. Kim says, "Edward, I love you too," and then she leaves the house greeting him. Here, Kim has the same hand as Edward, and many of Kim's companions have come to the bungalow. Kim shows them Edward's hand, which was not Edward's. Kim says, "My friend and Edward broke up." After that, everyone returns. Then the story comes to the present, where the old lady was telling her story to her granddaughter. Here, the old lady reveals that they are none other than Kim. She states that she thinks Edward will be alive today. "As I told you, he is not a human being, but AI means artificial intelligence. Your age will increase over time and will not decrease." Then his nephew asks, "Did you love him too?" "How I loved you, why didn't you meet Edward?" Kim says, "Because I have aged. I want Edward to always remember or miss me like he last saw me." Her niece wonders how she can say with such certainty that she will survive. She says she was snowing when Edward came into the world for the first time. It still snows today. There would be no snow if Edward was not present. While cutting the ice in the bungalow, Edward is shown making statues that look like angels. "I was sharpening the ice, the left ice was falling on the city as it fell many years ago on Christmas Day." There was also a statue of Kim among the statues. This scene concludes this sentimental film. Thank you.